Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify, Mr. Zacco. Your testimony and all of your responses to the various questions we asked you says to me that the situation regarding data security and national security issues with regard to Twitter is massive, and that Twitter is not doing very much to be helpful at all. In fact, there are major disincentives to Twitter doing anything, to spending the time or the resources to address the concerns that you raise. So, for example, the FTC, very out resource with regard to trying to keep Twitter under any kind of even a consent decree that was entered into back in 2011. And more recently, they're contemplating making Twitter pay $150 million for some misuse of information, $150 million fine for a multi-billion-dollar company is nothing to provide any kind of incentives for them to change what they're doing. And yes, there is information out there from so many different sources, including our appliances and cars and everything else. However, Twitter is a huge, if I can call it, a single platform where one can access information. So who is going to force Twitter really to do anything? If we were to adopt some of the legislation that's contemplated, if we don't have an agency that can implement and enforce that law, then we are back where we started from. So what is it going to take to force Twitter to change its ways?
Well, this starts at the top in Twitter, and you need an executive team that is willing to go in and say, the executive team themselves acknowledged, and I heard them say, we have 10 years of unpaid debt here that at some point we really need to get ahead of. They need to prioritize that. And to my understanding, a board's primary role is to make sure the right executives are in charge of the company, the CEO in particular, to make sure they are sending the company in the right direction. This needs to be a long-term incentive rather than short-term incentives for the companies, because the short-term incentives just mean that they're going to tactically run from fire to fire and not actually pay down debt for a long-lived, valuable company.
So your description of Twitter, though, is they're mainly focused on the short-term monetary incentives. Who's going to force them to look at the long term? Do people need to go to prison? I mean, what do we need to do to get Twitter to, at least, from what you're telling me, they cannot even identify foreign agents in their midst?
Yes, ma'am. And, to be blunt, some foreign agents will probably be pretty good and difficult to identify, but some were, in this case, not. And they're only, to my awareness, being identified when they're brought to them. They're not even attempting to. I think holding people accountable is a good start. I think that is something that people are concerned of. But you can only hold people accountable if you can measure and quantify what their targets are and what changes need to happen. And if you say, such as what I saw, Twitter needs to have a mature software security program, that's a very ambiguous and qualitative term. So holding accountability and setting quantitative goals and standards that can be measured and audited independently, I believe, is what's going to be required to change management structures and drive change in companies when it's needed, such as this.
So we don't even have the kind of standards to which we can hold Twitter accountable to. Is that right?
From what I saw, they were able to be answered in the affirmative without actually meaningfully making the intent of the regulators was correct. But you could then say, yes, I've done this, hold up an isolated example, and allow somebody to assume that that example was at the whole environment, knowing that you're misleading.
Excuse me. So do French regulators have better standards to which to hold Twitter accountable to?
My understanding is that one of the reasons the French CNIL is more feared is that they dig in technically and go towards more quantitative results that are less easy for organizations to sort of wordsmith around in their
Yes.
response and answers.
I think that's something we can learn a lesson from. But specifically, are you sure that you discovered Twitter compromises its user data long after the users closed their accounts? In fact, you stated that the accounts are simply deactivated while the data is not fully deleted. At the time of your departure from Twitter, was that the company's continuing general practice that they don't really eliminate the data?
Yes, I was told straight out by the chief privacy officer that the FTC had come and asked, does Twitter delete user information when they leave the platform? And the reason this person told me this is he said, I need you to know this because other regulators are asking us, and this ruse is not going to hold up. So instead of answering whether we delete user data, we intentionally have replied, we deactivate users and try to sidestep the program because we know we do not delete user data and cannot comply with that if they demand us to.
You would think that that would be something that they could do technically to be able to actually delete data, because for the users to deactivate your account means that there should be nothing there of your account information, et cetera. Isn't this something technically that they could do?
This goes to one of the fundamental root problems I mentioned in my opening oral statement, which is they would need to know what data they have, where it is, and why they got it, and how long, who it's attached to in order to do that. If they did that, which should be a fundamental expectation that I would have as a user, yes, at that point, they could absolutely delete the information.
Thank you.